Today we're continuing our series of lessons, Finding the Heart to Go On, Measuring Up, David Style. We spent the last several weeks looking at the story of David in the Bible. I love all of the stories of the Bible, and well, we focused on David because David is such an example to us, but David has pointed us towards some important truths. If you can recall, 2 or 3 weeks ago when we began, we looked at the anointing of David and what it meant to become the second king of the United Kingdom of Israel. We talked about what it meant to follow Saul and the repercussions that came as a result of that. We noticed as we studied from the life of David that in all of these stories comes meaning for each of us. We've learned that to measure up David's style means to measure up from the inside out, that David was a man after God's own heart, and Samuel was able to anoint him and was pointed towards David because David had that kind of character. And so, though Saul was head and shoulders above all the other guys, a great warrior in his own right, his fatal flaw became the end of his kingdom. David was chosen, he was anointed, he was filled by the Spirit of God. And then we see this magnificent story 2 weeks ago. We spoke about the story of David and Goliath. What a story that was. 5 stones, of course, we talked about. One of those sinking into the skull of Goliath, and he fell face forward onto his face, dead on the spot because of the courage of David. And so David taught us so many lessons, and well, the stories of David go on and on and on, and today we'll continue that story. So let me encourage you to turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 18, and we'll pick up the story of David today, measuring up David's style. But I love stories, and I thought I'd share with you a story that I heard the other day about a preacher. You know those preacher stories? Well, here's another one for you. There was a preacher who had a lot of problems with his teeth, and he went to his dentist and found out that he needed to have all of his teeth removed and dentures put in on the top and the bottom. So this is quite an ordeal, quite an operation, but he went in and got all of this taken care of. And then once he was done, they fitted him for his dentures, a beautiful set of dentures, and he was able to heal up enough that 1 week after getting those dentures, he was able to preach, but he only preached for 5 minutes. But that was okay. Everyone was okay with that, of course. And so he healed up a little more. And the second week he came back and he was able to preach for 10 minutes. And that was even better. Everyone was pleased to hear that he was healing up and doing well and had a beautiful smile. Another week went by and he came back and began to preach. And well, he preached an hour and a half long. One of the members, taken aback by this, took him aside in the back of the auditorium and said, a few weeks ago, after you got your new teeth, you spoke for 5 minutes or so. And then, well, last week you spoke for about 10 minutes, and that was fine. But today, like an hour and a half sermon. What's going on? Preacher said, well, I think I got this figured out. The first week, after I got my dentures, I was a little sore, still healing up, so I only preached about 5 minutes or so. The second week, I healed up a little more. My gums were less tender, and I was able to preach a little bit longer, about 10 minutes or so. But this morning, I got up. I was in a rush. I came to the building. Got ready and everything, and came to the building. And I got into worship and began to preach. And boy, things just kept coming up in my mind. I just couldn't keep my mouth shut. So I preached, over an hour and a half, and so I'm really sorry, but I think I got it figured out. You see, this morning I got up, and I was in such a rush to get to worship that I pulled out a set of teeth and put them in, and now I realized I put my wife's teeth in, and so when I began to preach, well, I couldn't keep my mouth shut. Well, you probably don't like that story, depending on which gender you are, but preachers don't always preach short sermons. Sometimes it takes a new set of dentures and a new smile to preach a short sermon. So we'll spend a few minutes this morning, or whenever you're watching this video, to enjoy this lesson. We won't go too long, but before all is said and done today, we're going to learn some important lessons about David. And today's lesson is about success. Success is something that is elusive to us. One of the things that I read recently, Even this week, I reread it and I wanted to share with you. It's a quote from Michelangelo, and this is what he said. He said, "The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it." Well, our vantage point, our viewpoint of where we are and what we want to achieve makes all the difference in the world of what kind of success we receive in life. We're entering into the story of David immediately following his victory over Goliath. And we saw a great victory there in that story, but those days afterward become a problem for David in a sense, and they can become a problem for any of us. How do you deal with success? I mean, failure is something that, well, we get used to dealing with that. And most of us, at some point in time or another, we deal with failures in our lives, we cope with them, but how do you deal with success? And how do you continue on the path of success and learn from it? So, the title of our lesson today is When Your Success Comes at a Price. And there's a price to success. And we learn in our lesson today, beginning in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 and 2, a little bit about what it means to experience success the right way. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day on, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his family. All of a sudden, the victory was David's. All of a sudden, David was experiencing all the success, and all of the people in the area and the soldiers and his family and even Saul and his household and Saul's own son, Jonathan. Well, everyone, well, they were tuned into David because of this great victory. So David's success was becoming already perhaps a problem to him. Saul is keenly aware of what's going on here. He's already beginning to evaluate, and we know this because he did not let David get out of his sight. He made sure after this victory that David was close by his side. But we learned some important things here about success. Now listen very carefully. The first thing we learn here is that success can alter the course of your life and your relationships. We might feel as though we become successful at something in life. We become a success in our job. We become a success in relationships, perhaps. And well, we measure ourselves with these successes, and we tend to think, well, I can just be successful and go on as though, well, nothing matters anymore. I don't have to try anymore. I don't have to work anymore. We fail to realize that with success, there is a price. David experienced a great price here because all of a sudden, after his success, it altered the course of his life. We see in the first two verses that all of a sudden he meets Jonathan and they become friends. They become these compadres, if you will, made an immediate connection together. So in those relationships, David began to see an altered state of existence. Once he became successful, even his relationships would become very different. We also learn from this that success can reward you with opportunities that you never knew possible. Now, David was a bit of a nobody. David was a shepherd boy out in the fields, and he was of some renown. You know, he was killing lions and bears, and kind of with his bare hands or with a club. So they had begun talking already about David and his abilities. And so David had some renown, but he really was just the youngest child of some other guys. He really was a nobody at that point. He comes onto the scene and he burst forth through this grand experience with Goliath, and all of a sudden his life changes. Success is his. And this is sometimes the way success happens for each of us. But it does reward us with opportunities that we never knew possible. David was able to meet the king's son and to make a connection with him, a new friendship, born out through new experiences. And in the household of Saul, David would experience things that he never would have experienced otherwise. You know, success has a way of doing this for us. When we become successful, all of a sudden the people around us begin to change. All of a sudden, a new circle of people come into our lives. All of a sudden, we find ourselves in situations and places and circumstances that we never would have experienced had it not been for our success. So there is a price to pay for success. You may begin running in different circles and getting to know other people, getting into situations and circumstances that you never thought possible, and that's part of being successful. But success can also bring greater responsibilities. David all of a sudden becomes a man with a burden. He once was this shepherd boy, of course, as you know, and he's out in the fields and he's taking care of his sheep. And well, he's had some success there, but his responsibility level was just about here. The expectations of his life were just about here. The expectations were really not that much for David until he became successful. And then he became a person of great renown that everyone knew about, that everyone began to hear about. And, well, they were singing songs about him and such. And so these responsibilities changed, but all of a sudden, in these responsibilities, there would be accountability, because those individuals who are successful in life, well, we expect more from them because their capabilities are very clear to us. So success has a bit of a cost. There are changes that will come with success. Now, we tend to say in our lives, I do. I want to be successful in life. Don't you? Don't you want to be successful in your job, or be successful in your marriage, be successful financially? We want to be a success in life, but David's story teaches us that when you do become successful, when God does bless your efforts, that there are going to be changes in your life. There are going to be greater responsibilities. There's going to be a new circle of friends and relationships. And there are going to be occasions in which you have a greater accountability. People will expect more of you as you are successful in the ways that God blesses you. Let's continue to read in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 3 and 4. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing. He gave it to David along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. And Jonathan's basically given him everything. Take away all those things that identify him as the king's son. He gives these to him, and what we read in Scripture was that this was the mark of a new covenant, an agreement, if you will. Jonathan not only had an affinity for David, but in this relationship, there's a pledge, there is a covenant bond between them. And Jonathan is sealing this sort of conflict, this sort of relationship with David. He's sealing this with a contractual obligation. He's saying, I'm giving you these things as a sign, as a mark, as a covenant between us, because everything has changed now that you are successful. This is something we notice in life, that, well, things change. We noticed already that responsibilities and relationships and circles of friends and even accountability changes when we become successful. But success can require of you commitments that may not always be a blessing. Now, I can see these two together, these young boys, Jonathan and David, and, well, they like each other. They get along. It says immediately they struck a chord together. And, well, you probably know people like that you met, and, well, you hit it off. You do well right away even. Maybe there's even a commitment or a bond in that relationship. But you may not realize that there can be a cost to that relationship. Later on, we're going to learn in the life of David that he's going to pay a huge price because of this relationship with Jonathan. And he never would have been in this covenant bond relationship with Jonathan, if David had not been successful on the battlefield. It all began with his success. But he enters into this relationship perhaps thinking, well, this is great. All is well. I have a new friend. And so the new friend is the king's son. What does that matter? That's sometimes the way teenagers think. What does it really matter? But there will be a cost to this relationship. Let's continue reading in verse 5 of 1 Samuel chapter 18. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. And this pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. Well, there's a circle here that is ever widening of influence because of David's success. All of a sudden, things are changing. We can see in the story that there's a circle and it's getting wider and wider, and David is having more influence. He's having more friends. He's having more people, more associations with individuals. He's even having covenant bond relationships with people. He's in the king's house, and the king won't even let him go home. So his life has been turned upside down. And success can do that for us when we least expect it. We don't know, perhaps, but when we become successful, there are all sorts of changes that happen in our lives. And we need to learn to roll with it and recognize that with success comes the blessing of accountability and change in our own lives. We learn from this that success often requires a greater effort than you may be willing to give. Now, it may be the case that you become successful and it came as a complete surprise to you. This has happened to me before. I can remember as a kid playing sports, and I never was the best on the team. Always was, sort of the last one picked to be on a team. And I can remember, when I got the basketball, I'd try to shoot, but I couldn't even hit the rim sometimes. They saved me for the part in the game when we're already up by 10, 15 points, and okay, let's send in Price, let him have a chance. So I lose the ball a few times, and that's my experience. But there were times on rare occasion that I got in at the end of the game and I actually had a little bit of success. But what I realized was that in between games, I would be better off during the game if I would learn to spend a little time in practice so that, when the game came and they gave me a chance and maybe I could make a goal, Well, when I practiced a little bit, that came a little easier for me. I never became the star, mind you, never will be on the basketball court or on the football field, but I learned that success requires a greater effort than sometimes I was willing to give to be successful. Successful people in life are willing to go down that road. Successful people in life are willing to prepare themselves. Successful people in life are prepared to follow through with what their promises are. David was a successful person in his life at this point because he worked at it and he made it so. Now, you have some goals in your life that you haven't achieved yet. You have some of those ambiguous things out there that you always thought, well, I'd like to do that, or I'd like to be successful, but maybe it's not in the cards for me. Maybe I just won't be able to achieve those things. Years come and go, and then all of a sudden you begin saying things like, well, I always wanted to do that, or I always wanted to try that, but I never did. I guess it's too late. Well, the woulda, shoulda, couldas end up enveloping our lives then, and we reach whatever age we are now, or maybe even years from now. Do you really want to be that person that looks back and says, what if? What if I had really tried? What if I had really put that effort forward? See, David didn't have to say that because David did. David was successful because he put one foot in front of the other. In fact, we read last week or 2 weeks ago on the battlefield, with quick steps, he ran towards Goliath. This wasn't a pattern for him of meandering around the battlefield. He rushed the giant, and as the giant rushed him, and as you well know the story, one of them walked out alive, and it wasn't the giant. It's because David was on the way towards that goal, making decisions that brought him there. But sometimes we realize that in the process of becoming successful in life is that there are so many decisions that we need to make. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 6 and 7, let me continue reading. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his 10,000s. Now, it's interesting here that they're singing to Saul. To Saul. They're not singing to David, who was successful. They're singing to Saul. Now, Saul was unsuccessful. Saul was hovering back away from the battle. He was sending everybody else in, and this shepherd boy comes in. He tries to throw some armor on him. David had been an armor bearer, but David said, hey, I don't need this stuff. It doesn't fit me. It's not my style. David sets it aside and goes out to battle with 5 smooth stones and a shepherd's purse, a sling. And this is how David went into that battle. But these women, after all is said and done, the women are coming out. And women, they're talking, they're singing now, and they're singing to David, to Saul, instead of singing to David. But they're singing to Saul about David. Oh, ouch. Oh, man, that hurts. And what they're singing is the substance of a nightmare, if you will. Saul, who had been used to getting all the glory. He was head and shoulders above everyone, if you recall. Saul was used to getting all the attention. And all of a sudden, here's David, and he has killed his 10,000s. Now he goes on to say in verse 8 and 9, listen to these words. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. I don't know how that could be translated better, but I think you could say it really ticked him off. He was really, really upset. And I would be too, wouldn't you? The success of David was beginning to become a mark on his kingdom. He said, they have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but a kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. You better believe he did, and he should have. Now remember a couple of things going back. When David was anointed, David was instructed, and he was filled with the Spirit of God as he was anointed. David knew that he was the upcoming king. The new administration would come with him into this new united kingdom of Israel. He was the fresh face, the new kid on the block. He would bring into the united kingdom of Israel a new day and a fresh face. And he was coming into this experience with glory already. I mean, this guy, his poll numbers were pretty high. Even the women were out singing about him, and he wasn't even hardly king yet, wasn't even close at this point. But David knows all of this, and, well, you'd think that he might get cocky. I mean, I would. Wouldn't you? Be tempted to be so. Sometimes we realize that there are choices that we have in life, but the choices make a difference. Choices matter. We recognize that the choices that David is making, well, it really has to do with